Welcome everyone to our discussion today, where we will be revealing the true power of BIM. We are joined today by a special guest, Dr. Stephen Eyre from the Delhi Webb School of Construction at Arizona State University. We'll get into introductions here shortly, but wanted to remind you of a few items before we begin. Ask us questions or leave comments at any time, and we'll be sure to address them during the webinar. And also don't forget to rate the webinar and give us feedback. You can rate the webinar at any time using the heart scale rating above the broadcast screen. I'd now like to introduce our guests. We have Dr. Stephen Eyre and Dale Dutton. Stephen, would you like to introduce yourself and give us a little bit of a background about your BIM history and some of the work that you do at the Arizona State University?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm really excited to be here. Stephen Eyre at Arizona State University. I like to introduce myself by saying I'm a technology geek, but my work starts with a very simple philosophy that technology is here to support us, the human. So what that means from a research perspective is all of the new technologies I study, augmented reality, virtual reality, sometimes some simulation games, these technologies interest me in the ways that they impact the human, which means the metrics I collect relate to human performance. The analysis approaches I implement relate to human performance. So how fast can we complete construction tasks? What kind of decisions are we able to make perhaps better with technologies? What types of learning benefits can we demonstrate with technologies? We're focused on the human more than kind of how I advance the technology. This may influence some of the discussion today. I suspect I'll bring kind of a lens through the discussion of often focusing on what's the problem that we're solving, or how are we supporting the human user in the different BIM workflows that we discussed, because again, that's really the focus of a lot of my work. So technology, but a focus on the human.
Awesome. Very happy to have you here with us today. And Dale, would you like to introduce yourself and a little bit of your background as well?
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, my background, I spent 30 years in the construction engineering firm. And in that time frame, I not only designed, I managed design, I also managed technology. And halfway through my career, I realized that my engineers were taking design and regurgitating that information into Excel and utilizing that in Excel. So it really led me to go get a more intelligent design system so we can all share in that one unique area of data, opposed to regurgitating it in different areas. And that really grew my passion for the data behind everything that's connected to those models and to those drawings. So the last 3 to 4 years there, I was really trying to figure out, how do I get these intelligent models out into the field, into the hand of the contractor, and then on over to the owner. And that really drove my passion to join InEight. I've been with InEight for about 6 years on the technology side of being able to reach out to a plethora of companies out there that are looking for a better system. So my passion is really intelligent models, getting those transformed into construction models, and then handing those over to the owner to be able to utilize those the way they need to manage their assets and facility management, if you will.
Awesome. Thank you. Really appreciate you being here as well today, Dale. I guess I'll introduce myself as well. My name is Chris Johnson. I'm a digital engineering specialist. In other words, a BIM specialist, I guess, as well. I've got 10 years experience in the design and construction sector, working with that data as well. And like you have both kind of mentioned, my main focus has not necessarily been on technology or software, but it's the process behind that and getting people to leverage the data, the 3D content, and then help them in the physical world as well. So I think we're all on a good page here. So I guess we're just going to kick off today. We're going to have some general themes that we'll be talking about. And I guess the best way to kind of kick this off is talking about, like, what is BIM and how would you define it? And I might throw this over to you first, Dale. Like, when somebody says what is BIM, and I know we're talking about a broad spectrum here, and I'm pretty sure we're going to get down into the weeds here, but how do you kind of define BIM, and what is BIM to you?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. BIM, first we have to realize that it's a process of sharing data, and that data generally starts in the design. It can be represented in the form of a 3D model and then associated with metadata. Then during construction, you add additional metadata that is needed to execute the work. transforming that design model, as I mentioned before with my passion, into a construction model. Now, some people reference that part as VDC, a virtual design and construction. So I'll probably flip-flop on that BIM/VDC through our conversation here. But then with that construction model and all of those digital threads, if you will, that is information that can be turned over to the owner, allowing the model to represent that digital twin and to participate in the asset management or facilities management.
Stephen, what's your definition of BIM, and how does BIM fit into your professional workflow?
So I think I would agree with a lot of what Dale had mentioned in his definition of it. The way I typically will describe it to my students is kind of describing BIM as CAD meets database. So it's now the geometry or the model content that we've historically had some version of, whether it be 3D or 2D. But now we're taking that content and embedding information within it. So a door or a concrete slab or whatever the element is knows what it is. And I can actually embed additional database information into those elements so I can model physical and functional attributes into that digital asset.
Yeah, some really good points there kind of made by both you. And we really see how BIM evolves like throughout the project, through that design, the construction, and then that operation phase where you're seeing the model evolve, but also the database behind it as well. And kind of a common theme, and one that I like to particularly like kind of focus on at the start of a project is like, how do we set up projects for success, and how important is that connected data environment to make sure that we have an environment to share that information and progress it to the next step so information isn't lost. What are your thoughts on that, Dale?
Yeah, I think it's really important for that data to be connected. And, you know, just as an example of how that can be connected through a project is you can start with a 3D model. That model has quantities, right? And it can be pushed into an estimate. That estimate, and then you may get awarded that project. Well, that project is going to utilize that estimate and then possibly even create a design model, if you will. And then you can compare those two models together to see what the differences are. Still with that data that connected there, those quantities actually turn into dollars and then into a control budget, if you will. And then if you think about that control budget, so some of that control budget came from the BIM VDC, which has materials and quantities within there. That will turn into some work, which is chunks of work, if you will, broken down in packages of work. And then that can be progressed through the construction phases. Again, all of that data connected as it flows through there, and then over into the QA, QC, and the turnover to be able to visualize that in the model as well. And then at the end, you're handing over this data-rich model so they can actually utilize that in the life cycle. So all that data is connected from the start to the end. And so the owner could utilize a very rich model of information to manage what they need to.
Yeah, and really good points. One of the particular things, and we've kind of mentioned it there, like how it develops and when it develops is a crucial kind of, it's a crucial part of BIM, I think. And I think sometimes we get lost in the technology side of things, and we forget to stop and ask ourselves, like, why are we doing this? Does it have a purpose? I guess, like Stephen, like when you have students, do you kind of instill that in them, like, and create that understanding of, like, you don't do something just because you can do it, you do it for a reason?
I think that's really important, but that does two things, right? So part of it is just intuitively we all have some understanding that technology should be supporting us, and so starting with that is just good planning. But the other thing it does, right, I suspect for some folks listening right now, they're debating, do I want to invest in BIM? Is it worth my time? Should I buy these technologies? Should I do this? And some of the discussions they'll be having, whether it be externally or internally, is it worth it? Am I going to see return on investment? And the answer to that question is so highly dependent on what problem are you solving. If you have no idea how or why you're doing this, don't expect to get a return on investment, because you'll have no idea if you are successful. But if you know the problem you're solving, you understand where inefficiencies are, rework reoccurs, maybe slow schedules happen, congestion happens. What are the problems that you have observed where you know that you are currently experiencing issues? Then you've got a chance of proving empirically beyond just a feel-good situation, we actually saved money on this, or we found some value. So starting with that problem is not just about good management, but it actually helps you make smarter decisions from your initial successes and failures. What worked, what didn't. Let's invest in the things that worked, and then make evidence-based decisions.
I agree, and like particularly clients that I've worked with over a long span of time, they find those value adds that are important to them. And I guess a natural progression I've seen in the Australian Pacific region is those clients, after a number of years of understanding and projects, they start to create their own documentation and framework of their BIM requirements and what they want to see on projects. And that could be as simple as like they want their project to have particular cost savings throughout the construction phase, and they want their project delivered fast, or they have a vision that they want to use this spatial foundation that's handed over at the end of the day to help them operate as well. Dale, sorry. What are some of have you had some of the similar experiences with clients, particularly in this area, or do you see this as like a progression at the moment around North America, where we're starting to have more savvy clients finding out what they particularly want on projects?
Yeah, I would say both, and I certainly agree with Stephen's comments. Some of that is that they hear about this BIM stuff, but how do I get into it, or do I want to get into it? To Stephen's point, you have to understand what is your current workflow, and how do you pass information from not only from discipline to discipline, but department to department, right? How are you sharing data between those departments? Are you getting 3D models? What information do you wish you had with a 3D model? Understanding where you're at today can really paint a clear picture of where you want to be able to make those decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I know sometimes I'll talk to people, and I'm in the academic realm, so I get to experiment with some out of the box ideas. And sometimes I'll talk to people that'll come up to me at a conference back when we used to be in person, and say, this is never going to work. And I found myself saying, yeah, you're probably right. Within your organization, if you already know your workflow doesn't support this, the people won't use it, they don't trust this, they don't this, then that's a bad technology to use, right? The point is not to force everything just because we can. So I think that's so important, Dale, what you're saying. I often think that this is sometimes maybe challenging or overlooked by companies of they'll know that they should be looking at their current workflows, but we sometimes have this tendency to be like, I just need the fix. What's the magic technology? Just buy this. And when the technology doesn't fix it, you say, well, it was never really the technology issue. It was an underlying process that you had there. But that sometimes is harder to look at. So if you start with that process, that problem, define where the inefficiencies are, rework, data entry, like you talked about, Dale, where I'm going to regurgitate and rewrite the same data. Those are your opportunities right there. Target those. Then you find your ROI. I
mean, it's a lot easier said than done a lot of these times. And what I find sometimes as well with clients is like, they're like, oh, I've heard about this BIM, or I've heard about digital twins, and like it's a lot of investment. But what I find some of the times is they're 50% of the way there. They are working with these digital workflows. They are managing 3D models and data that's linked behind them. And I think that often kind of brings up a misconception that you need these BIM specialists, BIM managers, particularly to sit on your project to manage these. But I think a lot of the day it comes down to that workflow, that documentation, having a process written about that. So like, how important, Dale, is that on a project to have like not only like an overall outstanding framework of what you want to achieve with BIM, but detailed on a project, like having those workflows and processes written out, so it's an understanding, it's a baseline for everybody on the project to work to.
Well, just to your point of your question, it does give you a baseline of information that you need. That documentation will highlight what what kind of metadata, what kind of workflow, who's going to be touching what as it goes through that process, right? The whole project team, and when I say the project team, I'm talking the A&E firms, the contractor, and the owner, right? They all have to be on that same page to understand what data and what model, what documents, whatever that is going to get passed through the whole process of design, construction, and then for the owner to utilize it the way they want.
Yeah, accountability and visibility as well. Like, I think a lot of the time it doesn't just have to be the owner. Like, the owner has a vision, and yeah, we should deliver to that owner's vision. But if I want to benefit internally, in, let's just say I'm an architect and I want to benefit from BIM, that might look like some automation or some computational design inside my workflow practices to get that benefit. And there's nothing like stopping that particular firm, whether that be an architect or an engineering consultant, to achieve that. Stephen, what are your kind of thoughts on the whole idea around project documentation and or a client framework, or a framework inside an organization like an architect or an engineering consultant?
I kind of agree. I mean, I think there are points all around, but at least what I've seen, I like the way you framed it, Chris, in that I think if companies are able to produce value of BIM internally, that can be value right there. Even if another consultant on the project is not on board, even if someone else is not on board. Admittedly, if you do that, you're still going to have some of the challenges that Dale talked about earlier of rewriting data, right? Because once we go communicate, if they're not on the same page, you will have some inefficiencies. But if a company's out there and they're trying to sort of dip their toes into the BIM waters, I know of companies that do this. So for example, we've got a couple of subcontractors in the Southwest region that will do BIM even on non-BIM projects because it enables their prefabrication efforts. Now, someone would say, yeah, but how do you coordinate if others aren't going to work with them? Well, they'll work within the areas that they don't have to worry as much about other contractors. So if it's an electrical contractor, for example, they may do electrical rooms where they're going to get priority, and they don't have to worry about what if the mechanical ducts collide with my systems. They're not worried about it in those spaces. So they'll BIM out and prefab those areas, even if the rest of the crews don't. Long term, hopefully we will get to a point where everyone will do BIM and we can have that one source of truth, the digital twin. But in the near term, I think I'm kind of a believer of start small, fail quickly, and learn from your mistakes. So let's if there is potential value and listeners are seeing workflows in their organizations that they can do, I think that's a helpful thing to start there. The other thing I would comment on, Chris, you mentioned in your lead up question, talking about a BIM guru, or do you need a BIM geek for this? I don't think you do. I think you need someone that can help to manage the BIM. I mean, there are some practical needs if you've got a digital asset that will need to be used. But I think the idea of having someone say, I won't do BIM because I don't have a BIM specialist, in 10 or 20 years will be as crazy as saying, I won't do Excel because I don't have an Excel specialist or an email specialist, right? It will become just the way it's delivered, or even more on the nose, right? Saying something like, well, we won't use drawings because I don't have a drawing specialist. Yeah, we all use the drawings. It's just a source of information. BIM is a different package, but it's still kind of communicating the same vision. So I think it's important that people understand the process. The points and clicks on where to go in BIM, that's the easy part to learn. If someone's committed, that part they can pick up faster than the underlying processes that BIM supports.
Yeah, really good points.
Chris, if I can just jump on that BIM guru, I totally agree with Stephen. And you know, I look at this that, you know, sometimes when I talk with customers, they're like, well, who should do what kind of thing? And do I need to hire a BIM guru? And my response is everybody is already doing their project and their job today, right? You're just introducing a model to help visualize some of that information and not, again, regurgitating some of that information. You know, so I think of like a document management person that's out on site. They receive drawings from vendors and documents, right? Why not extend their responsibility of connecting those documents to the model, so then everybody else utilizing that model downstream has that added benefit, easily finding documents that they need quickly connected to that model, right? And then the estimator, they're already taking data dumps, if you will, today and utilizing that in Excel before they push it up in the estimate. Why not just give them the model where that data is coming from and let them push it directly into their estimate? And then I can go to field engineer. I can just continue to go on. Everybody's already doing this work already. Just allow them to have that access to that one project model, if you will, that everybody's sharing. And then that just becomes a very rich model for the project as they execute work.
Yeah, I agree. We've kind of hit on some really good points here, and I know we haven't made it sound easy, or at some points we've said, oh, it's easy. You can do this, but like, what if kind of in both your, and I'll point this to Stephen first. So like, what's been some of the reasons that BIM's been hampered in adoption on particular clients or projects in your experience?
So I think part of the challenge stems from a comment that we discussed earlier of starting with defining inefficiencies and opportunities for improvement. I will sometimes hear someone say, we tried BIM, it didn't work. That's interesting. Well, how'd you do it? What happened? And what I hear from them is, I applied a technology that could never have solved this problem. I tried it. It didn't solve the problem. So the technology's flawed. And that's the same issue that I said earlier, right? We're starting with the solution and searching for a problem. If we start by understanding the inefficiencies we have, I think it is harder to deny the value that we can provide. So the question is about what's hampering success here. I think using BIM in a way that is not conducive to providing the solutions we need. I'll add one kind of further thought maybe for the listeners. And I tell my students this, and it's kind of a weird way of thinking about BIM. But when you think about what we do in our domain, right, we're building buildings or infrastructure. Unlike a lot of other domains, the thing we build, a building, right, has never been built before. It's never been worked on by the team of individuals. Generally, it's usually a new team from projects to projects. And we expect the output of our efforts to work properly the first time we build. I don't build 3 hospitals so I make money on the 4th. I want to make money on the first one. What I'm getting at here is that's a really challenging workflow, especially compared to manufacturing. BIM all of a sudden provides a virtual version of that thing we've never done before, to communicate with the people we've never worked with before, to actually allow us to fail in BIM so we succeed in the real building. What I mean by this is I tell my students, we don't do BIM to succeed. We do it to fail. We just do it to fail really early and really cheaply. Case in point, right? We're going to hit clashes in the field, or we could hit them in the model, right? Either way, we're going to have problems with mechanical systems here, plumbing systems going through it. We're going to have to fix that problem. It's way cheaper, way faster to do it in BIM, right? Schedule congestion, because I realize I've crashed my schedule and that no one can get anything done because they're on top of each other. I could realize that in the field, or realize that early on in scheduling by visually seeing, oh, there's a lot of trades on top of one another. Those failures that I'm talking about, I think that's a good way to enable success and avoid, Chris, your point of why does BIM fail or why do efforts get hampered? Because you've kind of used BIM in a way where it identifies those opportunities to fail quickly and cheaply in BIM, so you succeed in the field where it's really expensive. And I think a couple of successes in the field is probably what's going to help to avoid those situations where people fail to use it. Because once it becomes an asset, it would be like telling someone now, can you do a project without Excel or without email or without, it's absolutely not. I think that's where we need to get with BIM. And some companies are getting there, but I think the use of a technology where it couldn't possibly address a problem, those bad experiences, I think that's hampering a lot of the use.
We love to blame technology, don't we? Like particularly in those circumstances where there is a fail sometimes. You mentioned something before, and Dale, I'm going to refer this question back to you as well, but you kind of really hit on some good points then, and you kind of mentioned it before about like pinpoint success on project and running with that. Like one thing I always tell my clients is it's like a bit of a cliche, but you're going on a journey with this. It's not something that will resolve like on this project. We're going to find our successes and then multiply that next time, find new successes, bring those into the fold. So that idea of finding like pinpoint success or pinpoint BIM, like particularly in my personal journey and bringing a lot of general contractors on that BIM journey, is those small areas where you don't have BIM models, but we've created them around complex points where we know there's going to be issues, and focusing our energy on creating BIM, whether it's even like simulating that design coming in, simulating the construction process to find some of those clashes, find where there's going to be issues. And then that's the start of that BIM journey to realize, okay, this actually proved a real successful on this project. This is what we want to multiply next time. Over to you, I guess, Dale, and in some of your experiences, like how have you seen like BIM hampered, like what's stopping the success of BIM on projects?
Yeah, I really like your guys' comments about and the way you looked at that. So I'll take a little bit different spin as to that. I'm not really into BIM yet, but I'm thinking about it, kind of thing, right? Change is hard, for people just to change their processes of what they're doing. They already have current processes that are proven, they're effective. So they just don't understand what that ROI, as Stephen mentioned earlier, that might be, right? Time and resources could be a challenge. Implementing new systems or processes is not generally received very well. They don't receive intelligent models, or there's no requirements that is required to deliver a model with the right detail, if you will. Some companies feel that they need to hire a BIM or model expert to execute that and to get into there. So I guess my point is there may be obstacles that you need to address and bridge that gap. But those are the things that I hear of people maybe not getting into BIM yet.
Okay, so some really good points here, and I guess we might regurgitate some of this, but I want to frame this in a different way. If I was a client or an owner and I wanted to get into BIM, like kind of what are my first processes? Where do I start, and then where do I evolve? Like in this starting point. And Dale, you can probably continue here.
Yeah, sure. And we've touched a little bit on this already. Understand what your current workflows are, right? I mean, you're already today passing information throughout your organization and from company to company, from design to construction to owner, right? You're doing that today, whether you have a model or not. But then if you really think about the BIM aspect of it, having that 3D model, having that access, how are you using that today? Are you not? And I really like Stephen's point earlier that there's a subcontractor that uses it, whether the project requires or not, and they're not passing it because they've already seen the benefits to themselves of, hey, I'm going to go create this 3D model that didn't come from the designer because I know it's going to help me in my execution process, right? So there's an ROI that they realize that I'll spend a little bit more time developing this model because it's going to help everything else down the system. Yeah,
good points. Stephen, on that, do you have anything to add as well? Like, I know that we're talking a lot about that process-driven, like it is a lot of what BIM is. It really is process-driven. Like, do you have anything to add around that? Like for a company starting their BIM journey, where is it that look at that process workflow first? Is that their first step?
I think so. I mean, I think that's an important first step. The other thing that I think even though I'm an academic, if I were thinking more like someone in industry, I would be thinking about is how long will it take to see an ROI? Sometimes, and I'm going to critique myself and people like me in academia and sometimes industry, we will sometimes critique BIM where we talk about it's making a pretty picture, which is to say it's a nice model, but we don't use it for anything. And we'll sometimes critique that because we'll say, well, they're only using this to make some kind of cool presentation and that's it. If, however, for your company, you're finding that you're losing work, you're a GC and you're not getting proposals to go with your company because you're losing work because the competition is illustrating, here's our site plan, here's our schedule, here's our approach for this project that intuitively communicates to an owner in a model, here's what we're going to do, and you're showing a hand-drawn PowerPoint kind of thing and you lose it, there actually can be some value to the pretty picture that we sometimes critique. I'm not actually advocating that this is a long-term way of getting into BIM, but the question's about how does one kind of start, or what might we think about initially? So I think processes has to be the first thing you look at, or you just won't know if you found value. But I would also look at kind of speed of a return on that investment. If for something like the example I just mentioned, you're not getting work where you think you are just as qualified as the company that is getting work, maybe that's where you say, look, this is a pretty quick turnaround. I put in a couple weeks of effort to model out my site plan or my 4D schedule or illustrate a 5D schedule of when the owner will be expected to pay money on this project according to the evidence I'm showing. And that leads to you winning a job that you wouldn't have won. That can also be, I think, a compelling way to get a foot in the door to kind of the BIM process, is win that job that you wouldn't have won otherwise. That's a pretty good sales point.
I think that is a really good sales point. And that idea of that, if that data visibility it's a big topic, you know. So like, what are the key factors driving a change in attitude and behavior really towards that full data visibility on a project? Dale, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think understanding that change is a challenge, right? I think that's the very first thing. Making sure everyone understands the return on investment, as we've mentioned a couple times, right? Communicating that process and workflows may change. Some processes actually may take additional steps, but the benefit downstream is exponentially better for everything else that happens. And you know, change should improve quality, efficiency, and dollars. And you have to be able to measure it some way for that change to be effective.
What are some of the ways that you measure that, I guess, on a project? Like how would you see that being measured? Dale?
Say that again. What was your question?
What are some of the ways that you measure that and you see that as a point of success on a project?
Yeah, so what I've seen before in change, and I'm going to go to a company I know pretty well, that they were challenged to reduce their estimating time by 50%. So they started actually drawing 3D models and taking quantities from that model to create their estimate. And by the time they went through that change, they actually killed that 50%. It was like 30%. You know, that they were, or 70% better, if you will, on timeframes of turning around estimates. So by being able to turn estimates around much quicker, then you have more opportunities to win projects, which brings in dollars into the company and what you can execute work. So that's one example of that.
Stephen, what are the key factors driving change in attitude and behavior towards full data visibility or success on projects?
So I think a lot of what Dale said is true about measuring the value, right? He talked about an example of estimating and how by measuring the time estimators spend in doing their processes, that is one approach to proving this value of data visibility in this case. So I think that's a really powerful approach. I think when you have good data like this, it becomes challenging for resistors to continue to resist, right? An example he gave with the estimators, we could theoretically have estimators go do their more traditional processes. Not only is it slower to do that, but what we're asking these really experienced, really knowledgeable people to do are sort of administrative tasks like figure out how much stuff you have to estimate, the quantity takeoffs, right? Instead, we're taking that grunt work, so to speak, and giving it to BIM to do and enabling the experienced human, the estimator, to do what he or she has spent years of their lives preparing to do and are uniquely qualified to deliver, which is apply an appropriate number based on the unique conditions of a project. So I think that's a really good approach. When people decide to again, try to assess the value of data visibility or BIM in the future, my only caution is to make sure you apply metrics to track that value that are related to the BIM, right? So what was good about the example that Dale mentioned there is the time savings using BIM for estimating is directly related to the function of BIM. I no longer need to do manual takeoffs because they're automated. And so it kind of immediately has that sense of, I can see where there's value to BIM, and by measuring it, we can then make a strategic plan to invest or not based on our results that we get.
Yeah, some really good points there, Stephen. It just reminded me of something actually that I've found in my professional career as well, is there's the hidden advantages and the hidden markers as well of success of BIM that come out of it. Like in particular, on one project, we project outcomes. We wanted to do 4D BIM. We wanted to simulate our design and our schedule, and that's all good. And they did that part of the project well, but they found this hidden side of it where when they were showing the simulations in design meetings, and they were just videos really, there was no real, it was more just a contextual way of explaining that to a client, and then also not only the client, but like council members and such who they were seeking permits. And that was giving them a contextual way to, instead of getting a permit for one crane on a street, getting two, and then bringing down street closures for like a week, and being able to simulate that, show that, get the permit. So people that don't really understand design documentation, and they can see it in a video and they can see it in context, there was a win there that like really helped them tighten up that schedule and get a win on the project without that necessarily being one of the things that they had as an outcome for success for BIM on the project. So there's a lot of these hidden kind of benefits as well that will pop up during people's like journey as well. So collaboration on projects, how important is this? And we talked about the common data environment before, but that environment, when it's spread out, and particularly something that we've noticed now, like in COVID and working remotely, like how important is that common data environment on projects for that collaboration aspect? Dave?
Yeah, I think that the collaboration is key to success, especially during a COVID pandemic, if you will, and people have to be separated, but work has to go on. Construction still has to be done, and you need better tools and ways to be able to collaborate information back and forth to get that project executed through the process, right? So with that, a lot of 3D models could easily be passed back and forth, and the data utilized in some of that. And then I just go back to one of Stephen's comment earlier. The construction companies have realized that the benefit of 3D models, and when they don't get one or one with enough metadata, then they will go and actually create their own with the metadata that's going to help them succeed in that. So the enabling tools that allow people to collaborate in different locations, and even the one project model, I have collaborated people throughout the whole country, or even different countries collaborating on one model. It's very important.
Yeah, I agree. It is. I often call it like the spine of a project, really, the common data environment, because it's so crucial. And I think we've had like a bit of a rude awakening in the last 12 months of the importance of that, like not sitting in the same office, but being able to share that information. I think it's really kind of brought the industry kind of where it needs to be up like a year or two, because we're learning about new ways of like sharing that information. And this is a really good place where I think that technology and software has been a benefit, particularly for the companies that were kind of ahead of kind of this curveball on BIM, because they've seen success because they had processes in place to ingest this data, ingest large models, ingest new technology into their workflows. Stephen, the companies that kind of don't have this documentation, they're in a pretty unique position, because there's a lot of information out there, a lot of processes that are documented. They're in a unique position where they can catch up to the competition quite fast. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I mean, it's a challenging time, and so it's an opportunity for them to catch up and to embody or embrace some of these technologies. I hope that's what happens. I think for some, they won't. And I think they will continue to experience challenges with workforce, which we don't have enough people already to build a lot of our projects, at least in the States, and older, more inefficient processes that don't take advantage of communicating one consistent vision, that we're all on the same page. I think we'll have more needs for rework and things like that in the field, and they just won't have access to enough people. So I think, broadly speaking, this challenging time we're in will have good outcomes for the industry. I think for a lot of companies, this is an opportunity to innovate. I think for some, this will be an opportunity for them to realize we're not going to innovate, and this may be, the start of the company saying we're going to go a different route, or we're going to sort of close up shop, because I just think at a certain point, we don't have the option not to build. I think, Dale, that was your point. Yeah, it's a challenging time. We still need roads. We still need bridges. We still need schools, right? Whatever. And so I think this is a time where innovation can enable that consistent vision that you've all talked about in a remote environment. And the lack of it, I think, will be especially challenging for the companies that absolutely refuse to. I think when we get more out of this, I don't think they will have the margins in their workflows to cut costs and compete with those who have gained efficiencies and who could theoretically cut costs and still be profitable. And so I think at a certain point, it just, I don't know that economically they will be as viable. It's a little more doom and gloom. I don't mean to be dark in this, but I just think the practical outcome of if you don't innovate, you know.
Well, and it is a bit sink and swim. I know particularly like in my region as well, like with the client standards that we need to perform to, like I couldn't be a general contractor 5 years ago and then deliver to this. It's a new level of, you have the complexities of building these buildings or infrastructure. And then in a lot of places, you have this added complexity if you don't have the workflows and processes on top to be able to deliver to these standards. You are right. That is a bit of a sink and swim situation where it might be doom and gloom, but I think also like the opportunity and the learning pathways that are out there, particularly around software and technology and the partnerships that you get with these companies, that does give you a chance to also catch up to the market. It might not be straight away, but I think there is an opportunity as well. So I think a little bit of both ways on that.
And maybe I should say, my intent too, I don't want to come across as saying, oh, just use technology, otherwise you're going out of business. That still doesn't undermine what I started with. Start with the workflow, start with the processes. I guess I'm just trying to say, we don't have an undo button as a society, as a people. So we're not going to sort of get out of the COVID realm and say, okay, go back to the way things were. We're going to adopt a lot of the strategies and technologies we've done. So if a company is listening and they're saying, no, I'm not going to do BIM, I haven't needed it in the past, once we go back to normal, it'll be just like it was. I think I'm stating the obvious, but no, it won't. So there is no undo button on this.
And I'll pass this to you first, Dale, I guess, like with this challenging year that we've had, what have been like kind of some of the technological advancements that you've kind of seen work with particular clients that have kind of been in that position to be able to like succeed with some of these technological advancements?
Well, I think that there's already been a lot of solutions built out there to address specifically BIM opportunities, and letting them to be able to connect to other systems. I think the connection and be able to pass data between systems is one thing that's been improved on. Another area is digital twins, and we've heard this around for a few years, right? But I believe the products are improving to provide a better turnover to the owner at the end of the job. And then I think of laser scanning, that whether you're doing that via drones or handheld or tripods, this technology is getting more and more on projects to communicate current project conditions, or even reducing manpower, if you will, to do that drone. And some of these are done at night after everybody's left the site, that they have drones going through there. One thing about the drones, though, even to reduce risk of safety, is that they use drones to fly transmission lines to do their inspections and things like that. So I think we're getting there, and I think some of the tools are already in place, and we weren't just taking advantage of all of those. So I see more advantage taken of the software that's available. One thing that really kind of sticks in my mind too is once you get into this world, you will find diamond in the rough benefits from it that wasn't part of it. Like Stephen mentioned, what is your plan? Make sure you have that going forward. You're going to realize some diamond in the rough benefits that come from that better your processes that you just can't plan on.
Yeah, I agree. Stephen, kind of what are some of those kind of advancements in technology that you've seen, or what do you see as kind of the next evolution of BIM?
I think the frontier that we have not really mastered yet. well, maybe all of it, but I think the one that really has the most opportunity is in operation. I think most people in the BIM realm recognize there are lots of values and opportunities for BIM for facility management or building operation in general, or efficiency or continued commissioning, or various kind of owner phase activities. I don't know that we've really figured out the exact way of enabling this. I think, Dale, you mentioned, or maybe Chris, you brought up too, some companies, once they get into BIM, some owner organizations will define their own processes and workflows. They may have figured out some workflows. I think some of the really exciting opportunities will come for the owners. In terms of technologies that are enabling it, I'm not sure most owners want to take on responsibilities associated with modeling, right? They'll get a model at the end of the project. And I think for a lot of them, the idea of saying, but how do I update it when I change something, I think is unappealing, bordering on even scary, because they don't trust the model to get updated. I think what could be a very non-trivial change that is coming out are the abilities of mobile phones now to be able to capture either photogrammetry-based data or actually LiDAR scanning data, right? If we put a scanner in everyone's pocket just because they're going to choose to do it with the phone they buy anyway, all of a sudden that updating a model may become a lot less daunting of a task. So I may be wrong, I mean, we're just hypothesizing, but I think that's something that could have a really big impact on the owner's use of BIM downstream. Most of the owners I've talked to thus far say, I don't have people that know how to model it. And if I don't trust what I have as a model, I'm not going to use it ever. If we could remove that concern by saying your digital twin really is a digital twin because the work orders you were going to process anyway, you're just going to process now via your phone, and you upload a scan rather than a photo or whatever it may be. I think that may be, I don't know, 10, 20 years from now, a major breakthrough that we will all see a lot smarter buildings being used and operated based on data and based on evidence from what we have in our BIM.
Yeah, it's something that, that's very common for me in that handover phase is we're handing over, and I always call it the spatial foundation. At that point, you're giving them the tools to build their digital twin if that's what they want to, if that's where they want to go. And when you hand over the spatial foundation, it can be daunting for some clients to have this and be like, do I have to keep this up to date? But like I said before, where you don't necessarily need a BIM guru, you're finding that through your data, what your facilities manager and asset managers are actually doing is they're upkeeping that data, the data itself, all the time, like as they're doing work orders, and you're giving them a foundation to plant that information on. The bit about the photos and the LiDAR is something that I'm starting to see a lot more, particularly in the Australian Pacific region, where instead of updating, and I'll just use an example where there was a building and it was getting fit out. They did the core building. We handed over that model. At this point, what they've done is they've used photos and 360 photo tours to actually use that as their information, their upkeep tool, where they're taking photos constantly and then putting pins on the photos and adding information as needed. So they have their foundation and now they're building on it with their live data. They're tracking it in some way. And, like at any point when they do some more capital works, they have that foundation to build on. They have a record to come back and use that information to kind of build from as well. So very interesting times. We've talked a little bit about that LiDAR and the drone side, and something I'm very passionate about. I love LiDAR. I love using my laser scanner whenever I get a chance. Any home renovation, I'm laser scanning, modeling, and then building from. But that comes with kind of some disadvantages as well. Like we're dealing with this enormous amount of data on projects we've kind of never had before, really. Does that like really hinder some of these projects, Dale, or do you think it's more that we're evolving fast enough that we can keep up with it? And probably a good point that I might just add in as well, it's having a point of realization, knowing of what you want to get out of that LiDAR or that point cloud, and just utilizing that part. What are your thoughts around like utilizing this large data on projects?
Yeah, I mean, that LiDAR laser scanning turning into points, thousands and hundreds and thousands of points into a model so you can actually see what's out there. I mean, it looks really cool, brings a lot of value, especially when you're working on projects that are what you call a brownfield site, and you want to be able to see, even in the design side, you want to be able to see what's out there so you can really connect to the right pieces and validate compared to the drawings that you received, is this really in the right spot that the drawings are telling me that I got to connect to, right? So the disadvantages, if you will, it's a lot of data to try to manage. Not only that, even collecting it from the scanner itself and then getting it into the hands of the designers, and then into the hands of the owners. So the disadvantage, and I think we're getting better, is just that it's a huge file. Right? How do I manage that huge file? How do I pass it around effectively? Can I really get it in the cloud and share that effectively to be able to use models without them being very sluggish and not being able to get around? Right? I think those will increase and benefit. And the other thing is, generally today you've got X, Y, and Z and RGB with each one of those dots, right? So I think everybody really wants real data with that. And so how do I take that laser scan and make it intelligent with more data that's going to benefit me from that scan itself, opposed to manually going in and adding data as well?
Really good points there, Dale. I'll just get maybe your final thoughts on this, Stephen, before we kind of wrap this up. Is we're talking about the evolution of BIM, and something that I know you know a fair bit about is like virtual reality. For a long time, it's used as an entertainment purposes, but as we're moving forward, we're creating these digital representations of our construction sites or our buildings or our infrastructure projects. How do you see virtual reality or AR in that instance being utilized on a project?
I think there are a lot of ways. I will say, I think, augmented reality, in case anyone is not as familiar, augmented reality is the blending of the real world and the virtual world. So think if you're in the US when you're listening to this and you watch American football and you see the yellow first down line on the field, that's a virtual representation on a physical view. Right? So that's what we're talking about. But here I can see what's behind my wall and that kind of thing. I think AR, augmented reality, this is what I'm talking about, will be very valuable when we are looking at verifying what has been built as it relates to what was supposed to be built, and doing that verification of accuracy and those kind of things. I think that will be very valuable there for those kind of quality checks of comparing the model to the built space, because it quite literally blends both. I think virtual reality, and think video game, this is purely synthetic. We're just in a video game realm. It can be on your face or on a screen or in a big room. I think that will be very valuable for instances when we need to make decisions or fail, like I said earlier, identify problems in a process or design early. So I need to know what about this design needs to change up front. I think that's where virtual reality will be really effective, because it communicates content intuitively enough that generally owners or engineers or contractors can recognize problems with the design or the finishes or the constructability of a given environment, and voice those concerns, again, early, where it's quick and cheap to fail, like I said, so we can make smarter decisions in the field.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, both Dale and Dr. Stephen Iyer, today for the discussion on BIM. I think we can reflect mainly on the process side of it and how much it is driven by process and workflow, but also how much there is that you can benefit from BIM as well. So appreciate you both today for the discussion, and thank you all.
Thanks, Chris.
This was fun.